You're listening to Blood in Bohemia, a Czechast special series.
I'm Vít Pohanka.
And I'm Rob Cameron.
Two journalists cutting through the murky thickets of Czech history where murder and power have long walked hand in hand.
Let's step into the shadow. Wenceslas, devout and upright, having at last given his life for his zeal in faith and piety, was from the whole people regarded and proclaimed after his death as a holy martyr. And before many years had passed, indeed even while his own brother, the author of his death, still held the throne, reports of miracles at Wenceslas's grave spread swiftly, reaching even into distant lands. Yet it was the Czechs themselves who preserved his memory with the greatest devotion.
So that, Rob, was František Palacký, the historian, a famous historian. He had a great voice. What do you think?
Very nice very voice, right? Mellifluous and imposing voice. Absolutely. But I think, Vít, before we go any further, I think we should just clear up one thing, and it's a source of confusion to a lot of people, I think, outside of this country. Every schoolchild in Britain has heard the name Wenceslas from the Christmas carol Good King Wenceslas.
I'll stop you there.
Okay.
Can I play you something?
You can.
Again, very shortly.
Good King Wenceslas looked out on the feast of Stephen, when the snow lay round about, deep and crisp and even. Brightly shone the moon at night, though the frost was cruel, when a poor man came in sight, gathering winter fuel.
So this was just a short excerpt, and I wanted to play it also, not just because you mentioned that, and we will get back to that, but of course, I mean, this series is called Blood in Bohemia, and we shouldn't lose track of the fact that this Wenceslas, this good man, was actually murdered.
He was, but it's also important to point out that this man that we know in Britain, at least school children know, in the United Kingdom as Good King Wenceslas, he might have been good, but he wasn't a king.
No, he wasn't. He was a duke.
He was a duke.
Which is a lower rank, of course, yeah. And the kings came only later to Bohemia.
So there was, as far as I understand it, a King Wenceslas, but he wasn't very good. In fact, I think he was decidedly bad.
Well, there were actually four of them, I should be quite precise. Wenceslas the First, confusingly perhaps for some listeners, wasn't this Duke Wenceslas, the Saint Wenceslas that we are talking about later. But especially bad was the last one, which was Wenceslas the Fourth. And he was a drunkard, obviously. He died, he drank himself to death near Prague, probably. But that was much later on in the 15th century.
Okay, yes. So let's just recap. So there were a number of Wenceslases. The Good King Wenceslas of the Christmas Carol is probably our Wenceslas, the one we're talking about.
That's the mythical figure,
right?
Yeah, definitely.
But he was neither a king, nor was he Wenceslas the First, i.e. the first Wenceslas. He was the one before that, and he was a duke.
He was a duke, he was the leader, we would probably say, the head of the Přemyslec family, which at that time wasn't the only family in Bohemia, and he was struggling hard to get them, probably not even to unite the country, but to kind of get power over all the other families and to get the country somehow together.
Mm-hmm. And how much do we know about this period, though, Vít? I mean, this is Bohemia in the early 900s. What do we know? Did the snow lay roundabout? Was it deep and crisp and even?
It probably was, but it certainly wasn't an idyllic place as people would imagine, kind of romanticize it. It was a country that was covered with forests mostly. There were a lot of wild animals. The population density was low.
So there was a lot of gathering of winter fuel.
There must have been. But to your hovel, probably. I mean, to survive the winter, not to kind of enjoy the Christmas Eve or Christmas Day. It was still basically not, as I mentioned, not very densely populated country. The population would be like 1/10 perhaps of what it is today, maybe even less. But the estimates are very inaccurate. And to get what I wanted to mention, there was definitely, again, a lot of blood around because there were wolves. The agriculture was still primitive. People had to fight off the wild animals. There were bears, probably, in the dense forests that kind of surrounded central Bohemia and everything. And there was some trade going on, but we don't know much about it.
I mean, so it sounds like a pretty sort of primitive and brutal and bloody place. But can I just read you something? Because there is one thing that I do know about Bohemia around about that time, and that comes from an amazing book that I read recently. It's called Goodbye Eastern Europe. It's by a Polish historian called Jakub Michanowski. I think he's possibly based in the United States now. But there was one paragraph in it which really I found absolutely astounding. Can I just read it? Just 2-3 sentences.
Go ahead, please do.
So he says in his early chapter, which is entitled Pagans and Christians, he says, 2 competing trade routes, both dealing in human cargo, seem to have functioned at the same time. One led south from Novgorod in northern Russia towards the Caspian and Black Seas. The other went overland from the Baltic to the great slave market of Prague. There was a great slave market in Prague?
It's good that you mentioned that and that you quoted it, because I actually spoke to a real historian, not an amateur like us, who are very interested in history. And that is Eva Doležalová from the Institute of History of Czech Academy of Sciences. And she actually mentioned exactly this aspect when I asked her what Czechia was like, or rather Bohemia, I think at that time was like in the 10th century. And this is what she says.
Our knowledge of Bohemia in the 10th century is based on a very small number of preserved written sources and some archaeological finds. On the other hand, there is a very long historical tradition full of myths that have evolved over the last 10 centuries. However, these stories can differ greatly from reality. Bohemia was not a single principality. There were several families, I could say also tribes, competing for power. The most powerful dynasty, the Přemyslids, gradually took control over central Bohemia and sought to expand in all directions. However, Moravia and Bohemia certainly did not form a single entity during the 10th century. It started in the half of the 11th century. The Přemyslids adopted Christianity at the end of the 9th century and started building their principality as Christian states. For them, getting baptized was basically a ticket into the club or more developed countries such as Bavaria or Frankish Empire. They wanted these states to see them as equal partners. Just they didn't want to be under their control. So this caused a lot of tension, which kept growing over the next 2 centuries. And then to Czech or Bohemian economy, the economy was based on the trade routes between the west and the east, basically based on the commodities such as agricultural products and slaves, who were still being sold in Prague at the end of the 10th century.
So, if I understand correctly, adopting Christianity was more of a political, probably, gesture or more of a political measure, rather than that it would kind of spring from deep persuasion and beliefs.
Yes, definitely. It was certainly kind of political act, which did every dynastical family in the Central Europe during the 10th or 11th century at latest.
Did you learn about the slaves in school, Vít?
No, we didn't, I have to say. I think I learned about that only at the college, much later. And it was in connection with English language, actually, because I think we learned, that the word Slav actually comes from slave.
Of course.
And I think I learned about that really after the revolution, as we say. I don't know whether it was, I don't think that the communists, would be against discussing this fact, but it definitely wasn't something that me as a schoolboy was growing up with a kind of general knowledge of existence of such a thing.
And do we know whether Czech kids today learn this in history lessons in school or it's been a long time for you, so perhaps you don't.
Well, I have my own kids who are now growing up, or grown up in one case, and a teenager, but I don't recall, that they would ask me a question about that. But it's not that it would be, it's just not discussed really.
So it's not taboo.
It's not a taboo, but it's not kind of pointed out, it's not stressed as something important, even though from our perspective, and especially, I would even think, that the context of the culture wars, and the discussion of imperialism, perhaps, that it may become a topic, more of a topic than it has been so far.
Right. Well, we don't want to get sidetracked. I just thought that was a fascinating aspect of life here at that time, 1,000 years ago.
And Prague as a slave trade really city, market.
Not just one of many, but one of the main ones, that everybody came in the way they come for the Christmas markets today. 1,100 years ago, they came for the slaves.
So staying on the subject, which is Saint Wenceslas. So Wenceslas lived in this society, probably was owner of some form of slaves or indentured servants, at least, himself, definitely, because he was a powerful man.
And at that time, Christianity, for noble families such as his, was a form of upward mobility to kind of keep up with the Joneses, keep track with the noble families in Germany and France and so on.
Maybe even a touch of snobbery. We are also Christians,
Absolutely.
Okay, we may still have our pagan kind of rites and everything, but we are Christians. Anyway, back to Wenceslas. I, again, couldn't help asking Eva Doležalová, historian, what do we really know about? Because I kind of alluded, maybe he had slaves or something. So I was wondering, what do we know? What sort of man he was, what he looked like, etc. And again, here is Eva Doležalová.
There is no accurate physical description of the Duke Wenceslas nor of his reign. However, Wenceslas was certainly not a holy man, a monk on the throne. Such a figure would not have lasted long and would be been quickly removed by his relatives or opponents. Wenceslas was young. He was approximately 17 when he started his reign. And it was a young man who attempted to unify the country, build strongholds, and assert himself against a powerful neighbor. At that time, the neighbor was Henry I the Fowler, king of the Franks. Henry took unexpected military action against the new prince, Duke, and his claims in 929. Although Wenceslas was defeated, he continued to be respected as a ruler. The country had to pay a peace tax, tributum pacis, but it was not subordinate to the Frankish Empire. It is not certain whether this aroused resistance among some Czechs at that time. Later, however, sentiment against the alliance with the Frankish Empire grew stronger. And Duke Wenceslas also strengthened Christianity, and according to some reports, some records, even sought to establish a bishopric in Prague. However, it was his nephew Boleslav II who succeeded in this endeavor.
So, We don't know what he looked like. Yeah, we know that he definitely had ambitions because, as Eva mentioned, he was trying to bring in bishopric to Prague, which he didn't manage to do. But I was also curious about, believe it or not, about sexuality a little bit, because we obviously, the family line, went on and everything from his brother. But what we know in this respect about Wenceslas himself?
There are some indirect records in hagiographic texts in the legends saying that Wenceslas was married and has some children, but we don't know the names, we don't know the numbers, so these are only some very, very small pieces of information.
So obviously the hagiography is of this saintly, humble figure, but from what Eva was saying there, that's unlikely to be an accurate portrayal of who Wenceslas as a young man was.
If he was as ambitious, as all the legends, show, he must have had, I would say, normal kind of carnal desires, and he was taking part, in feasts and everything. So, of course, we can only speculate, but he was man of, flesh and blood, definitely.
But you said earlier that we don't know what he looked like even. So there are no contemporary images from religious books, and we have no idea.
All the images are from later on, and I don't say that I would warn, but I would like to point out that the best known image that we have, the equestrian statue of Václav on the Wenceslas Square here in Prague, not far from Czech Radio actually, by Misselbeck from early 20th century, is just idealized version.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there are no pictures. And I was also, wondering what sort of family did he live in, because we should mention that even though perhaps the religiosity of the Přemyslids at that time was a thing of political decision, there was definitely a kind of power struggle within the family. Saint Wenceslas's mother, Drahomíra, had his grandmother, Ludmila, who was very, very pious, murdered, believe it or not.
That's not very nice.
Back to reality,
How did that come about?
It was probably about a power struggle, and it is argued, but again, we are in a very kind of dark places when it comes to
murky period for historians.
That Ludmila, the grandmother, was trying to get allies from one part of Germany, and Drahomíra maybe from another part of Germany. What is now Germany, because Germany, of course, wasn't unified at that time. So there was definitely a power struggle. Nevertheless, just imagine, he grew up, Wenceslas, in a family where, mummy kills granny, and that's again, Eva Doležalová.
So two murders in 2 generations of a ruling family or dynasty, it's a little bit much even for early Middle Ages. But it was not entirely unusual. During the 10th and 11th centuries, the rules of successions, norms and laws were just being established. Blood revenge also played a significant role. In the early Middle Ages, when a ruler was killed, his family and the closest people were usually expelled or murdered. It was not easy to depose a ruler who was a person to whom allegiance and fidelity were promised. However, conflicts over power among relatives that led to a murder were not uncommon throughout medieval Europe. Such were the case of Edward the Martyr in England, King of England, or Eric, King of Sweden, or Saint Knut, King of Denmark. So these are some cases.
Right. So this is obviously a pretty bloody time, a period when blood feuds, omertas, if you like, are happening across medieval Europe. And so now let's get to the murder, which we believe...
What really happened, to Wenceslas.
Exactly, what really happened to him. And we believe, or rather, the clearest culprit is his brother, Boleslav.
You say Boleslav? Why not Boleslas?
I don't know.
When we say Wenceslas and he's Václav in Czech, and we say, I thought that when we say in English Boleslav, we should say Boleslas, but maybe, I don't know.
It's a good point. I don't know. Wenceslaus sounds a little too medieval for me. Certainly the Christmas Carol, I think, is good King Wenceslas. When it comes to his brother, who is obviously completely unknown to British or other school children, I think we would say Boleslav. But I mean,
he wasn't prominent enough. Yeah, probably.
I think he wasn't prominent enough to get an aus.
That's a very interesting and I think good point. Anyway, he was the younger brother, and there was competition not just between generations, obviously, but within one generation.
Do we know what he felt about his mother, who Drahomir is also Boleslav's mother, right?
Yes, we know what... she is. Yes, she's the mother of both. Yeah.
And do we know whether Boleslav is cheesed off that his mother has killed his granny?
Probably not, because what we know is that, and this is from again the legends, but also from the first chronicler that we have, Cosmas, that Boleslav, I will say, invited Wenceslas to his castle, Stará Boleslav, today, which is close to Prague, not to confuse it with Mladá Boleslav, where Škoda cars are made.
Where the cars are made.
Where the cars are made, which is further outside of Prague. So he invites him, and there's a big feast in September, and it ends in a bloodshed.
Is the castle still there?
The castle is still there, but of course rebuilt many times. There are masses held, on the Saint Wenceslas Day on the 29th of September.
I've been to one.
Was it the one when the Pope?
It was indeed. It was Pope Benedict, wasn't it?
What was it like?
It was very cold because it was very early in the morning that we had to be there. I think we had to leave Prague at 5 a.m. and drive. And then stand in a field waiting for the sun to come up and for the Pope to bless us with his presence.
And this was on the Saint Wenceslas Day,
It
right?
was indeed. It
29th
was indeed.
of September. Which year was it? Just curious.
28th of September, I think.
28th of September.
Yeah. There we go. A Brit correcting a Czech on the date of the national day. That's amusing. But yeah, the 28th of September.
28th of September.
Yeah, Saint Wenceslas Day, I think, which is a Czech holiday. And so you're saying that it was here in this castle in Stará Boleslav that someone, maybe his brother, we don't know, murdered Wenceslas.
And this is what historian Eva Doležalová says about it.
We know for certain only that Wenceslas was murdered. So the circumstances and exact reasons remain unclear. Legends say that Wenceslas arrived at his brother's court to celebrate the feast of Saint Cosmas and Damian, and the next day he was attacked on his way to church. He was killed with a sword at the church door, and this is all. Most texts consider Wenceslas' brother Duke Boleslav to be the murderer. However, this may not be true. Perhaps there was just an argument between the brothers, and Duke Boleslav's retinue intervened in the dispute. The conflict between the brothers did not necessarily have to be highly political. It could have been a normal human conflict between relatives, which escalated the day after the celebration, after the banquet in the evening, in the day before. The only report that was written shortly after the bloody events has been preserved in Widukin's chronicler, which states that Duke Boleslav, who killed his brother, rules in Bohemia. And that is all.
Yeah, so this is what happened, probably happened. I mean, what we know about what happened on the 28th, Rob, 28th of September. We're not quite sure about the year, but it was the 28th of September. I don't know. My mind slips. My memory slips.
We think it happened in Stará Boleslav, which is outside Prague.
That's true. And let me tell you something. I lived near Stará Boleslav, believe it or not, for a few years. I lived actually in Zelenec. It's a small village, but our středisková obec, or pověřená obec, which is like the place where you go to for your tax forms, where you have your passport issued, was in Stará Boleslav, and this is just on the side. It was quite annoying because today Stará Boleslav is connected with Brandýs nad Labem. So the full name of the town is Brandýs nad Labem - Stará Boleslav. And if you have to fill that out into all the forms, it can be quite annoying, I have to say.
I imagine it doesn't always
5
fit.
words. No, it doesn't. But I don't live there anymore. But I used to go to Stará Boleslav not to remember Saint Wenceslas, but to submit my tax forms and stuff like that.
And what's it like now as a town?
It's a small town, very close to Prague, kind of bedroom community, I would say, for central Prague. But it's nice. Yeah, it's a small town on the outskirts of Prague.
Right. So not much going on. Certainly no murders of
not that I know of.
Regal
no,
families.
no.
No.
But again, back to the 10th century. Pretty soon, obviously, the news about the death, if we don't want to call it murder or fratricide, actually, of Saint Wenceslas, started to spread, and the legend started developing.
So we know where he was murdered, in Stará Boleslav, and we know how he was murdered, with a sword, presumably, I don't know, stabbed or maybe even beheaded. We don't know that
There was
exactly.
definitely blood flowing.
There was definitely blood flowing in Bohemia, but we're obviously not sure who was holding that sword and who actually dealt the deathly blows.
That's a very good point, Rob, because we don't know who actually held the sword, but we definitely know who benefited. And that was the younger brother, Boleslav. So even if he wasn't the real culprit, he was seen, as the most probable guy who was behind it.
Qui bono, in other words.
Exactly, yeah. Anyway, pretty soon, I would say even the cult of Saint Wenceslas started growing.
Shortly after his death, Wenceslas became a saint and protector of the Přemyslit dynasty, Přemyslit family. From around the 11th century, Saint Wenceslas became the patron saint of the country, a man who holds eternal rule over the Czech lands in his hands, an eternal duke who only temporarily lends his rule to the kings or politicians leading now. Since the Middle Ages, statues of Saint Wenceslas as a prince have been erected not only in town squares, but also on the borders of the country as a clear symbol of the Czech states. Such a Wenceslas was understandable and acceptable to all inhabitants the Czech lands. It is not only for the Czechs, but also for Germans and Poles who had already settled in Bohemia and Moravia in the Middle Ages. It was thanks to them, especially to Germans, that the cult of the saint spread to other continents. Saint Wenceslas was also adopted by all other ruling dynasties in the Czech lands, and even the Nazis used him for their propaganda.
Right, and just to make sure that I've got it right, already when we talk about later Middle Ages, I know that the term colonization is not very accurate. Nevertheless, there were a lot of Germans already settling in especially the border areas. I'm speaking to you from Žďár nad Sázavou near Jihlava, where there was a German-speaking island right until the end of the World War. So when we talk about at the times, let's say 11th, 12th centuries, the cult of Saint Wenceslas was already functioning in there.
Yeah, definitely. And adopted by Germans, it started a little bit later, probably starting from the 13th century when the so-called colonization started, and the Germans came into Czech lands due to building new towns. Just this great era of both Přemysls, Přemysl the first and Přemysl the second.
Okay, so what I find interesting, I mean, just to repeat what Eva Doležalová said, I mean, Germans definitely helped the kind of internationalization of the cult of Wenceslas, which reached, obviously, even English-speaking world.
Right, and is still certainly present to a degree in this country as well, because September 28th is Saint Wenceslas Day here. It's a state holiday. And, I suppose every single Wenceslas square, and it's not just Prague that has one, you'll find them in other towns and cities, and I think even some villages, that's the Wenceslas that we're talking about, Saint Wenceslas.
Exactly, and let me just mention very briefly, I remember in 1989, during the November events, which are called Velvet Revolution, there was this great symbolism. People were meeting at Wenceslas Square under Saint Wenceslas statue, and Václav Havel, another Wenceslas, was speaking from the balcony. And of course, economic reform came with Václav Klaus, another Wenceslas. There was definitely, I think, at least a touch of kind of symbolism in that,
Absolutely. And just finally on that, Vít, I'm curious, how do you refer to him? What do you call him when you refer to him? Do you just call him Václav? Do you call him Svatý Václav? What do you say in Czech when you're speaking to
I haven't
Czechs?
seen any poll, but at least in the circles where I'm moving, I mean, people will talk about Svatý Václav, Saint Wenceslas, kind of to distinguish him from the later kings that were called really Wenceslas the first, second, third, and fourth, and the mythic kind of founder, of the dynasty. Even though the Přemysli dynasty already existed, it still was quite far from totally dominant in Bohemia, or even Moravia at that time. Moravia was quite separate at those days, but Václav is seen as the base, the real figure.
Right, and certainly one group of people who were obsessed with ancient myths and legends were obviously the Nazis, who occupied this country during the war and the protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia. But so what was it with the Nazis and St. Wenceslas?
Well, they were definitely using him because of that kind of German connection that we discussed, Did
they see him as a German duke?
As a German duke. Plus, as I think Eva Doležalová mentioned, I mean, he actually paid a tribute to Henry the Fowler, who was one of the major kind of German power brokers at that time. So there was this kind of symbolism that the Nazis used, and there's this legend that if someone puts the Saint Wenceslas's crown on his head and is not doing that rightfully, hasn't got the right to do that he or she will die within 1 year. And there's this kind of newer version of that legend from the beginnings of the World War II, when Bohemia was protectorate, Böhmen und Mähren. And Reinhard Heydrich, the Reichsprotector, I think, of Bohemia and Moravia.
Senior Nazi and also one of the architects of the final solution.
So he said, it hasn't been proven that he really put the crown on his head. And of course, within less than a year, actually, Reinhard Heydrich was killed by a team of Czech and Slovak paratroopers. So the Nazis definitely tried to use that. This is not verified. We don't know whether he put his crown there, but Nazis were definitely using the cult to kind of subjugate the Czech nation.
Right, and being obsessed with all that stuff, it's a completely plausible and feasible theory.
Be it as it may, I think it shows that the symbolism and the importance, of an image of Saint Wenceslas survived not only to the 20th century, but even for a historian like Eva Doležalová, even to the 21st century.
The story of Saint Wenceslas is interesting because it's still alive. It is better known thanks to tradition than to reality. It forms the central theme of the Czech national story. Moreover, the dispute between the brothers is dramatic and imaginable enough that the story Boleslav and Wenceslas can be understood even by people today. But as a historian, We always look for new sources and interpret them in innovative way, and there is always at least a glimmer of hope that a new text or source or some information will be found. So for me, history is an adventure.
So, kind of to sum it up, if I understand correctly, it's a relatable story. We can relate to it. We can sort of understand it, even though we live now in the 21st century.
Yes, definitely.
Okay, so I think to kind of sum it up, if we go back to his tragic death, which was definitely bloody, I think we can relate to that also because it happens, it happened even in the 20th century. And I don't think it's an exaggeration to say, when JFK, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, was killed in the United States as a president at the height of his power, he was killed young, nobody knows really what happened. I mean, at least a large part of the US population, American population, thinks there might have been some conspiracy. And I think that there definitely is a similarity, a young leader struck by death without really fulfilling his potential on this earth, but perhaps living on in the minds of nations.
I mean, just staying with that sort of morbid, maybe mawkish fascination with the killing of a young leader, don't you bring out his skull every year and put the crown on his skull on a cushion or something?
No.
Or am I imagining? I'm sure I've seen that.
You've definitely seen that, and as far as I remember, and I'm not quite sure whether I'm correctly remembering, it was probably in 2013. I wasn't here, but I remember seeing that as well. There was a restoration of his crown, and they did bring out the skull of Saint Wenceslas.
His real skull.
His real skull. And they did put it on that, and I think it went through. If we Google that, we would probably be able to see that. Yeah,
pretty grisly. But I mean, not unusual for sort of Catholic relics and the Catholic rite, I suppose.
Probably to give it a more kind of majestic feel. But you are definitely right. It is kind of morbid, isn't it?
Certainly is. It's pretty gruesome.
I just think that this whole story shows, that maybe it's gruesome, but it's something that it's symbolic, that's important for people, and so is the story of the death of Saint Wenceslas and what followed.
And I suppose it's a perfect entry point into the darker corners of Czech history.
And a fitting start for Blood in Bohemia
with Vít Bohanka
and Rob Cameron. Thanks for joining us on Blood in Bohemia, part of Czechast,
with Vít Bohanka
and Rob Cameron.
If you enjoyed the episode, tap follow, leave a review, or recommend us to a friend.
It really helps us keep going and create more series like this one.
So until next time, stay curious about the Czech past
on Czechast.